Hey, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about designing for desire. This particular presentation is going to happen in two parts because it's a bit longer, and it's also happening at night because I had a desire to film this now and not wait till tomorrow, because it's one of my favorite presentations so far. That was a hello from one of my fur babies. So let's dive right in. Again, this is going to be in two parts. I'm trying to keep these presentations to 30 minutes or less due to attention spans. That being said, if you would prefer them, these like lessons to be even more micro, like 5 or 10 minutes a piece, let me know. I'm happy to record them and chop them up in different ways depending on how you would like to view them. And this one has a desire to snuggle with mommy, which I think we can accomplish. So let's go ahead and make that happen while we are presenting here. Okay, let's dive right into this presentation. Again, hi, my name is Katie TT, and I'm going to share a little bit today first too about why you would even want to pay attention to something that I have to say. We'll go into that first because I think that's pretty important. But first, reviewing our topic, designing for desire, spaces that enliven the senses, spark curiosity, and nudge you to follow what calls you. And this is me following a desire I had to go and do afternoon tea on one of the trains that does it in NorCal. But first, let's talk a little bit. Who am I? Who the hell am I? I am Katie TT. I'm founder of Soul Sanctuary with over 10 years of experience each in corporate interior design, workplace strategy, personal development coaching, and more. I help entrepreneurs transform both their space and themselves. My trauma-informed approach blends strategy with soul, so you don't just redesign a room, you create a sanctuary that heals, inspires, and amplifies your gifts as a sensitive solopreneur, maybe a retreat owner, something along those lines. If you feel like you're supposed to be here, you're probably in the right place. If you're ready for a space and business that grow with you, you're exactly where you're meant to be. Excuse me. So, what desire really means, and I think we often have a lot of associations with the word desire. It can be like a really charged word. A lot of people associate it with things that maybe are more erotic or sexual. But desire isn't necessarily those things. It can be those things, but it's not necessarily those things. It's also not necessarily indulgence. It's not necessarily impulse. It's not necessarily chaos. Desire is actually at its core, at its foundational self, is about direction. It's about your internal compass, your internal GPS. And for some, it may feel like a biological whisper that pulls us towards what brings us alive, or even more alive, I guess you would say. Continuing what desire really means, I'd love to introduce you to a couple of people, one of which you're probably familiar with, and one you may or may not be aware of. I don't have their images here for just, copyright reasons, but I encourage you to look up both of them. The first is Mama Gina, also known as Regina Tomshauer, and she is an expert on all things desire. And so she's a really interesting person to follow. And her orientation around desire does include things that aren't erotic and also includes things that are erotic. And she's very much into the sexual side of things. On the other hand, two very different people, right? In these, obviously there's some overlap, but two very different people. Jane Goodall, who recently passed, very much into the nature scene. Her desires really showed up as a following of monkeys and the study of how we can relate to them and also attunement to nature. And so two very different women who are both, or I guess were, because Jane had passed away and Mama Gina is still very much with us at the time of this recording. Both of them were following their deeply held desires fervently, and just completely different fields. And so that is something key to remember, because again, desire is that foundational, excuse me for all the dings. I forgot to turn off my D&D here. All right, there it is. So desire being the core and the foundation of everything, it can go in so many different directions. And that's why it's important for us all to listen to our own internal compass, because we're all so unique, right? We all have overlaps and common interests and those kinds of things, but we all have unique desires and roles to fill and play. So that is one reason why I really wanted to just start with the definition of it. Desire is going to look different for each person who views this presentation. It's going to show up for each person a little bit differently, or maybe very differently. So what is our job in design? Our job in design is to create spaces where that inner compass can actually be heard and pull you in further and be expressed. Why desire belongs in design? Let's talk a little bit about that. People tend to perform best when they feel drawn in, they feel magnetized to something, maybe they feel some delight around a topic, where they feel safe enough to explore that topic. Because when spaces don't feel safe, it can often make us want to kind of shrink back a little bit. Spaces where people are inspired to imagine, and also spaces where people feel connected to themselves and the world around them, and they're encouraged to explore the world around them. So desire can be a biological motivator. Comfort and or safety, not enough. And I see a lot of people sometimes making this mistake, and I'm not, here to, criticize anyone about that. People just don't know what they don't know. But when you're designing for space and you really want to create a comfortable space and a space that feels like a little cocoon, it feels safe, that can be wonderful. But even I would say most spaces, even those ones where you desire to feel comfort and safety, still need a spark of desire in them. Otherwise, you'd never leave the cocoon. Cocoon being the metaphor for your safe space. So spaces can either dampen this instinct or ignite it. And again, we have to kind of watch where we might go too far into one area or too far into another. Of course, we don't want to be in spaces that burn us out either, because those spaces, you can never relax in those, right? So I almost never design spaces that are just what I consider like constant churn. It can just be overwhelming and burn a person out and just be deeply ungrounding. So we need to be balanced, and the balance just depends on that desire and that level of comfort and safety needed as well. Okay. So in talking about designing for desire, you design for, it might be the way a light touches the surface. It might be an invitation of textures. It might be the warmth or cooling aspects or properties of color, dimensions of color as well, depth, rhythm of space, curiosity created by thresholds. Ooh, thresholds. Those are like I could do a whole presentation on those, and I might, because it's such an interesting topic, both from it just for so many different reasons. When you're talking about public spaces, private spaces, they're a space of transition no matter where you're looking at them from, and they hold a lot of power, both in the way we perceive them, and also sometimes they have the potential to really be kind of a life-changing thing, right? When we talk about the way we, even just like locking the front door, could be an aspect of personal security. It could be a threshold at a bank, right? A bank vault, which is literally protecting like lots and lots of people's money, financials, right? That's huge. Thresholds are such an interesting and a topic with a lot of depth. So we're going to talk about that a little bit here. designing for desire, you also design for the scent and memory connection of materials, right? So you might smell something out in the world that reminds you of a childhood experience, and it just opens up this entire memory. Like, think to yourself for a second, like, have you ever had that experience where you smell something that reminds you of childhood? I have one. I have one in particular. Um, my gosh, my mom used to love this particular type of gum, and I don't even remember what it's called, but it's like got this like lavender taste to it. You could smell it through the box, right? And it was one of those things that at some point it became difficult to get. They just stopped making it, or they just stopped making it very much. There wasn't a big distribution for it. And so anytime we went to go visit my grandmother, I remember really having a really interesting experience of like my mom being just like excited to get the gum, and like me being excited too, because I also really liked it. And, just that anticipation of like the purple box. It was like, oh, it's here, And so, and then of course, memory lane would take me down experiences I had around my grandmother's kitchen table. And so I miss her. But so do you ever have experiences like that? See, I just thought of one thing. A scent can bring up so many memories and even emotions. And so it can be incredibly powerful. Damn, space is powerful, isn't it? Memory and inspiration evoking concepts in art. Artwork can do the same thing. An artwork or space that you use has been a lot of time in, can bring up a lot of emotions and memories. I mean, think about this. Have you ever seen or had the experience, maybe personally? I've seen this in movies, dozens of times, where people go and they revisit a space that they grew up in because they want to revisit the memories and emotions that they associated with living in that space. It can be a very powerful, of course, the person staring at them beyond the transition of that threshold is someone different than they used to live there, right? When they might have come home from school or from wherever. It's a really interesting thing that can happen when we have artwork, scents, other type of sensory stimuli that evoke memories. It can be a really powerful tool. Of course, one we have to be very careful with too, as we design for spaces that have the intentionality of safety and comfort, and that are trauma informed as well as neurodivergent informed. So this is way deeper. This is so much more about than decoration or making a space look pretty or aesthetically pleasing. Okay. We go deep here. In fact, to like indicate how deep I intend to take you in this process, I have included an image of a submarine, one of those fishes with the light bulbs on it that you can only find at the bottom of the ocean, and then an image of the bottom of the ocean, because I really just wanted to drive that point home. When you design with me, you're designing for deep feelings. We're designing for getting to the heart and the root of something to really help people transition, transform, to take them to new heights and to take yourself to new heights as well, right? Whether this is for your clients and hopefully it's for yourself too. We are here to go deep. That's the point. That is the entire point. Yeah. All right, let's dive deeper. So let's talk about the biology of desire, because there's like a lot of science on this stuff. And actually the science is where I really I love to geek out over these things, because the research shows us time after time after time. And I'm just so grateful that there are scientists and organizations out there that have made it a priority to do these studies so that we understand the impacts of the environments and the spaces around us, because it's important. And there are some people out there that don't believe it's important, but the science shows us it literally is, especially when it's the environment that you're constantly surrounded by, whether it's your home or your office or your workplace or where you go to shop, etc. We have biological responses to things that we perceive in space. And so here are a couple tips. Desire-rich environments can activate dopamine via inspiring anticipation and curiosity, studies have shown. And if you feel like researching any of these topics, please feel free to visit the links or ask me for the links, and I can copy and paste them in case you can't read them here because I know they're kind of small. But studies have shown that oxytocin, desire-rich environments can drive oxytocin via designing for deep connection, warmth, and trust. And we know that these chemicals, these chemical reactions that happen in our bodies, dopamine, oxytocin, etc., have a real power to impact how we perceive, experience, and drive forward our lives. It also has the power to activate theta and alpha waves. Now, if you know a thing or two about brainwave states, beta brainwave states are when you're kind of in like busy task mode, you're not really in creative mode. You're more in like task and busy bee mode is what I would kind of call that. Theta and alpha waves are different. They're more like creative and relaxed flows, depending. And we can get into, I want to do a whole presentation on brainwave states. In fact, I'm actually slated to do a whole presentation on brainwave states. But for the purposes of this presentation, just know that our environments have the power to impact blood pressure, lots of stuff that goes on for us physiologically. So it's important for you to know that as we continue. Effective design shows up in the body itself, and science gives us the tools, thank goddess, to measure its impact. Space is an active partner, and it has the power to turn the dial on these biological systems up, down, all the way around. Okay. That is important to know. And there is so much research on this. And I love that there's continuing research. One moment. I have a kitty who is trying to chew on a cord, and that's just not going to work for mommy. So, I don't know why she's getting into you. It's getting into you. She had a desire for a cord. So we'll have to find her a toy that will function like that instead. In fact, she's got plenty of those, but she doesn't seem to be drawn to them all the time. I honestly think I should just like chop up bits of cord and like let her play with them, but maybe that's the next step. I'm gonna find like an old, I don't know, an old lamp or something with a cord I can just like chop up. Anyway, the adventure begins with contrast. So you can see the symbols I have posted here. We have night and day, we have fire and rain, we have yin and yang. So desire, another thing that desire needs is contrast. It needs polarity, it needs difference, it needs tension. Okay, so you've got mystery and clarity, softness and structure, light and shadow, openness and refuge. And desire needs all of these things. And the adventure begins with, again, contrast. This is how things like nature can seduce us, right? If you're into biophilia, love of nature, this is how we get seduced from the indoors to the outdoors. This is also how people like, again, a wonderful case study, Mama Gina, teaches pleasure, right? She'll pull you out of discontentment and boredom into your desires. And it's how people, again, great case study, like Jane Goodall teaches us to stay curious about nature and the known versus the mysteries of nature and even human adjacent species that ignite our imagination and also our thirst for knowledge. Anytime I see a program with Jane Goodall, rest in power queen, anytime I see a segment with her, I'm like, oh, I gotta watch this because she's gonna teach me something. She's gonna teach me something about nature. She's gonna teach me something about herself, the world, and probably myself that I didn't know about before I watched the program. And that's one of the beautiful things about her work as well. Contrast and that tension between the known and the unknown can enhance that existing desire to explore. So a little tidbit about materials that can gently awaken the senses. Things like earth elements that evoke from an organic, grounded, and slow-paced place. such as things like wood, plants, clay, stone, velvety or woven textures, things that are soft on the skin. I personally love the feeling of silk, pools of warm light with soft edges, water, gently moving or still water, natural movement that shows breeze, gentle breeze, those kinds of things. And, one of the reasons why I want to share this particularly with you is that nature, biophilia, the love of nature, is a really beautiful way for us to embody both things that are really important to this, which is the desire and the safety and the grounding and the comfort. We have this beautiful combination in nature when we bring it indoors to be both soothed by it and also inspired by it. And that's one of the many, many, many reasons why I love biophilia and bringing nature into a home, is because it does double duty. I mean, as far as effectiveness and performance, when it comes to our physiological reactions and what it drives us to, who it drives us to be and do and have in the world, it does both really powerfully, and it's been scientifically proven. So the reason why I'm sharing this with you as a snapshot is because we can design our spaces in many different ways. Like, I love a splash of like 80s magenta pink just as much as the next guy or gal. And sometimes those more like kind of synthetic things can be really fun to play with, and they definitely have their time and place and space, and I love them. They're so much fun. And also, it really depends on, again, what you're designing for. And so, you may have a desire, you may not be that interested in nature, but you might find ways to bring it into your space that still fit with, excuse me, your aesthetic and your desire, what's moving you forward. So, but if you are into nature, you'll be glad to know that it does double duty here, which is great. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about curiosity as a design tool, because it is, Jane Goodall, for example, observed some more, some nature, little binoculars, right? I remember watching her with those, and allowed nature to call her in before she acted on what she was doing there. She watched and perceived the forest speak to her and give her all this information that she needed to then respond, which I always thought was really powerful about her work. I'm such a fan. And, she recently passed as of the filming of this video, and it's, she was such a gift. She was such a gift to this world, and she will be greatly missed. But she's also a great example of desire. So I love speaking on that. So good design works in the same way. It is about watching how people, in this case, it might be you or your clients or your customers, watching how people move, watching what they avoid, watch where they linger. And why might that be? Watch what they reach towards, and watch what their body instinctively does before their mind decides. Observation, and really keen observation, reveals desire patterns. One of the things I've often done in my design career and in other aspects of my career as well is get surveys from people, asking them what their experience of a space or a process or this or that, whatever was. And, it's really wonderful when people respond like honestly and thoroughly to these things, because it just helps us design things so much better. I also understand, like, when we get into like the corporate environment, people sometimes are understandably afraid to fill out surveys because they're like, oh, I'm afraid that their boss is going to see it, they're going to get in trouble, or that it's like some secret conspiracy. Having run a bunch of these surveys, like, knock on wood, like, I've never had the experience where it was like that at all. In fact, I was often the one reading the responses, and I was most of the time, with the exception of one role, not anyone else's boss. So, but I understand the concern. I understand the concern. But observing really does help us learn about ourselves, about others, whether it's via a survey, whether it's just, having a really keen observation, whether it is just, I don't know if you've ever had this experience in a job, in your business, etc., where you're teaching someone, training somebody, hiring somebody, or, maybe you're going on vacation, you got to delegate a bunch of stuff to your team, right? We have someone shadow you. And so you could decide to effectively shadow your clients, your customers, or yourself in a way that you pay attention to habits, patterns, organizational things, and you're going to really learn some interesting things about yourself. One, what you're drawn to. Also, you probably notice some things that you could like be more effective at or more organized at. And you'll just learn about what you need to be more successful. So when I work with people, observation is primo number one. That's the first thing we do. We can't really do anything until we understand what drives us and also what prevents us, because we want to give ourselves more of what drives us and less of what stops us or gets in our way. That's really, really key. So observation, I think, said with love, I think a lot of people kind of rush through that step, but it's one of the most important things we do. So I would urge anyone embarking on any kind of design journey, whether it's interiors, whether it's anything else, to really sit with what is. Go from there. And also just accept it. Don't make it wrong. Like if you're noticing some habits, if you ever shadow yourself and you notice like a bad habit that you have, like please don't get on yourself for that. Please be gentle with yourself. Make it right. Make it correct before you take any action, because we have to love ourselves and our clients and our customers exactly where they are and where we are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about thresholds, and then I'm going to wrap, and I'm going to save the rest of this presentation for part 2. So we're still in part 1. I'm going to talk about thresholds a little bit. Actually, do I want to save this for? No, because it'll be too long. Shoot. All right, we are going to do thresholds. We're going to do thresholds, and then speaking of thresholds, we'll take you into part 2, following along the lines of what I'm actually talking about. I'm going to give you a threshold into part 2 as a second part of this recording. So we'll get into this now, and then we'll wrap next time. Okay, let's talk about thresholds then. The architecture of anticipation, which is really what it is. It is a point in time and space that marks anticipation, transitions, mystery, all sorts of cool stuff. So one of desire's favorite places is in the in-between, that tension we talked about a little bit earlier. This is why thresholds are so important to this. So what are thresholds? They can be doorways, transitions, reveals. It can be what's behind the curtain. It can be transitions and hints to what's beyond. And it lies at the intersection and the tension of, I want to be here, but I'm over here, so not quite yet. Yeah. It is a physical marker in space of that push and pull. That yin and the yang, the polarity we discussed, the tension. It's also the physical marker in space of the known and experienced and the unknown and mysterious that can drive curiosity and intrigue. I don't know, I feel like only those of us who are really, really into design can get like that excited about thresholds. But no, in all seriousness, they can be really exciting, especially if you're like entering this like big, beautiful museum. But I tend to really geek out on it, and I love, love, love that stuff. And when I say geek out, I say that with love. Love for people who love to geek out on things, and love for myself on that. When I say the words geek or nerd out, like I mean those with all the love. We really just love what we're into. So thresholds, the architecture of anticipation, continued. So for those who are familiar to the space in question, that the threshold is sitting at. It may not be so much about the intrigue and mystery. Like, if it's my own house, it's not really an intrigue or a mystery. Hopefully, if someone's got like some big cool surprise. But maybe still just a key transition point, beginning or ending of someone's day, for example. And I've included a few examples below. Just think to yourself if you can relate to any of these. Seeing loved ones, pets, dinner time, longed for sweats. Maybe you're changing out of a different outfit after being at your job during the day. I've had that experience. A nap, maybe excited about your favorite show. It could be about refuge and safety from the world. Maybe you had a bad day, or maybe you're just like, I don't know, too much peopling and you're glad to be home. So whatever it is, there's a sense of anticipation in crossing that threshold. So, oh, what I wish I'd included an image here. That's okay. I will talk about it, but I forgot the image. Okay. So for thresholds and the architecture of anticipation, to further support and increase the mystery and intrigue and anticipation you may be considering creating. Soft corners, curves around corners. There is a building that I once studied in depth years ago in design and architecture school. It was a Walter Gropius house in, I believe it's Lincoln, Massachusetts. And it's really interesting. And it had an entryway with a curb and a lot of really interesting design features in that house. If you have a chance, I definitely recommend looking it up because it's definitely a unique and unusual home. And a lot of really interesting, kind of mysterious and interesting design decisions that he, were specific to his family and their needs and their interests and desires. But they had a soft curving entryway, which I always found interesting. Another way you could handle this, handle anticipation and intrigue would be gradual reveals instead of immediate exposure, right? It could be layers of transition points. It could be other objects in an entry space that are in between a person and the next room or the next space. It could be lighting. There's all sorts of things you can do for gradual reveals instead of an immediate exposure. Growing up, I lived in a pretty typical colonial home. That's the name of the type of house that that's what they call it, in the Boston suburbs. And so, in Massachusetts, whatever. And I remember we had two main entryways. And then we had, of course, our back door that led up to our backyard. In the front, there were two. The one that was used 99% of the time, friends, families, almost all deliveries, was our mudroom. And so that was our most commonly used transition entryway space. We also had a front door. Now that one was way more formal, and that was our foyer. And that was it led right into foyer and a living room on the left, dining room on your right, and then the staircase right in front, and then a door to the next to that would have led into the kitchen slash rec room. And so what's interesting is that formal, framed in the middle of the house front door, hardly ever used. Very more formal, less transition points. In fact, to the point where I remember sitting sometimes in the living room and just having kind of this jarring experience anytime someone would knock at the front door, because it was so unexpected. And because it was so unexpected, it had to be someone who didn't know us, or maybe was delivering something, or maybe wanted to sell something, who knows. And so I always found that experience really interesting. Most of the time people would go to the mudroom, which was way less formal. I mean, we had, our place to hang up our jackets. We had laundry in the back. We had entrance to the garage to the right. Like it was just very, very basic. But with a little bit more of a transition point, right? Like you could kind of see into like the mudroom and only kind of a little bit see into the kitchen versus, well, there was windows there, right? So there was like a couple of layers of transition points. It was way less formal, but it was more inviting because you'd actually kind of see into the house a little bit. The other hand, the formal, again, middle of the house, entryway, no windows seeing in. But it was also, there was really no layers, right? Like you could, well, not a lot of layers. You'd step in and you're just like in the house. No other doors really. I mean, you were just in the living room, in the dining room. There's a door to the kitchen. It was just very interesting how that was set up. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. So in any case, not to go down a total rabbit hole, but you can start to consider like how does your space layer? Does it layer? Would it help? Would it be beneficial for you to have layers in your transition point, in your home, your business, your whatever? Does it feel too exposed? Does it feel too closed off? Maybe it's a combination of the two, like my front door was, combination of too closed off and then too open versus our mudroom, which got just so much more attention because it was, again, layered and more, but also more friendly. Interesting how that works, right? Just intuitively to people as they're choosing where to show up in our home. There had to be a few intuitive things that drove them to that. So again, we have gradual reveals, we have light paths through windows, perhaps, right? Like I just mentioned with my house growing up, long, windy driveways that increase the transition. Okay, here is a designer, architecture, landscape designer, like secret, or maybe it's not so secret, but one of the things that architects will sometimes do to increase the anticipation and the views of the home is they'll orient it. You drive in and you drive all the way around something so you can see the whole expanse of, or most of the expanse of something. Maybe not the stuff people want to keep private. Like you may not be driving past someone's pool, but you might be driving by the entirety of the rest of their house. You can see the whole thing as you pull up, because God, what is the point of designing a whole big, beautiful building like that just to be like, oop, there, you're there and your driveway and that's it, right? Like that's kind of, that really doesn't do justice to the home or the anticipation of, experiencing the home or space or whatever. So that is a thing. So desire is about the invitation, it's about the intrigue, and it's about strategic, phased, and thought out degrees of exposure. If I can maybe highlight one sentence from this entire presentation to pay attention to, it'd be this one. Like, yeah. Okay, well, speaking of thresholds, this is the end of threshold for part 1. And we're going to be entering phase 2. So we're right at that threshold of the in-between. I invite you to come back for phase 2. We're going to talk about designing for emotional desire, desire in the workplace, desire for nervous system safety. We're going to talk about successful versus unsuccessful spaces and why they are that way. When it comes to desire, we go from there. Okay, thanks for joining me for part 1, and we'll see you next time for part 2. And I really look forward to seeing you there. All right, thanks.